Welcome to Inside the Game on the National Soccer Network. Now, here are your hosts, Jonathan Turner and Nathan Wangler.
Good morning, everybody, and happy Wednesday. My name is Jonathan Turner alongside Nathan Wangler. We are excited to have you on this beautiful Wednesday rainy morning here in Michigan.
It is great. I like rain, okay? It's very tranquil. It's nice. It sounds nice. It's good to sleep during, okay? All those things. It makes everything look green outside. You know, I mean, like, you could live in a place where there's no rain and it's just dry all the time. It's just gray and dry everywhere. You know, you could live in the desert.
You absolutely
I'm
could.
very thankful for it.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways, you know?
I get it. Hey, we were not here yesterday, and I'll tell you why. Nathan, it's all his fault. On Monday after the show, he called me and said, "Hey, I have a doc's appointment." And due to HIPAA laws, I can't tell you why he had a doc's appointment, but he had a doc's appointment, and he's like, "I can't make it to the show." And I was like, "Oh, well, I didn't want to come to the show anyways because we're going to the beach tomorrow." So that's what we did. Yeah, we did here. And so we took the day off yesterday, a much needed day of relaxation. I spent the day at the beach, and you have to look at me. I did not get burned.
Good.
Right. I mean, I did not get burnt. And that, to be fair, that is a challenge for me. I can tell you how many times, well, actually, I can't tell you how many times I've been burnt in my life. I would imagine that any dermatologist on earth would say, "John, you might be a petri dish for cancer." So I won't go into detail about that, but I got there yesterday, lathered up, had my nice beach shirt on, and I stayed red free, yesterday. So, but we drove 2 hours yesterday up north to a place called Caseville, Michigan. So we did yesterday. Got to the beach around 10:30 in the morning, and we hung out there until about 5 o'clock on the midway back home, and was a beautiful day. A lot to think about yesterday while sitting at the beach with no service for the most part. Because me and you had a show on Monday, and I got fiery about the U.S. men's national team and the quintessential handball that I call it now. My goodness, that thing exploded on TikTok. I mean, we've had 3,000-4,000 views before. We've had comments. I mean, we've talked about it. We've had 7-8 comments. Nathan, how many views does that video have right now?
I'm loading it up. TikTok. I'm loading it up right now. First off, I got to say this. I knew it in the moment. Just because you said it during the show. You were talking about handballs, but as me, being, a producer, someone, who's been in this chair, we just got a new comment that said wrong. That's it. Wrong.
Like I'm wrong, or like the
I don't know, man. That's all he said. Just one word, just wrong. So I like I said, I don't know. We are nearing 33,000 views on it. Currently 228 comments. Now that doesn't factor in the filtered comments. You got to keep that in mind too, because about half of the comments were filtered out because they were considered offensive by TikTok. So yeah, you nearly 33,000 views. You got 975 likes as it stands right now. So we're trying to get up to a K here. And yeah, 228 comments. But again, half of them probably filtered out. But I wanted to say this because I thought it was interesting to mention. Anybody watching this show, there's no one surefire way of ever going viral. But if you ever want one piece of advice, here it is. I'm going to do the JT thing. I'm going to use what he says. I'm going to give you the playbook, if you will. Okay? Make a hook. Make a hook in the first 3 or 4 seconds. If you do that, you got him. You got him. Because whatever you say, the remainder of that video does not matter. Does not matter. People don't care. They don't pay attention. 3-4 seconds, that's their whole takeaway. They, get all worked up about it, and then they leave a scathing review and they move on to the next one. So the way that it was formatted, especially with you being all passionate about that's the most egregious handball I've ever seen in the first 5 seconds, and then you qualify that wonderfully, may I add, with what the actual letter of the law is and how it's not technically a handball, but it's just kind of a stupid rule because of the nuance involved and everything else like that. People didn't hear any of that stuff. You could have spoke Japanese the remainder of that video. They would not have watched a single second of it. So if you ever want people to pay attention to what you're doing or any of your clips, or if you're a podcaster, create a hook, make a hook, and then everything else will go from there. But yeah, man, I mean, just
to be fair though, I don't know in the moment that I was creating a hook. That obviously came from you. So I just said what I said. And I think, to be fair, I actually think that I might have actually that whole me saying quintessential handball, the most, in history thing, that came, I think, towards the latter end of my whole like the whole.
Yeah, I flipped the order around a little bit.
So it was like I mean, so I but anyways, I think it's great. I mean, hey, if there's anything that we can do to continue to shine a light on this game, and obviously our show, we'll continue to do that. I mean, to be fair, of all the videos from the show on Monday, I mean, in totality, we're over almost 50,000 views. Between that video that you did, that short, another short that we did is in regards to Stefan Frey, the goalkeeper for Seattle, that had 10,000 views. So a very good short day for us here on Monday, and so we're very excited about that. But what are we talking about here today? We're talking about WPSL playoffs, League for Cup playoffs, USLW playoffs, U.S. Open Cup, which obviously happened last night. One remaining game here tonight, which we'll talk about the semifinals coming up here later in September. We'll get into some mailbag because, as we talked about, there were over 228 comments that came as a result of that whole thing. So we'll get into those this morning as well. So a lot to get into. And I do want to jump right into the WPSL playoffs. And if we talk about the WPSL playoffs for a second, a lot of teams around the country, right? So 16 teams across 4 regions: the Central, the East, the South, and the West. We have a bracket. I'm going to put it up here in a moment. Most of these games, or all these games, will take place here this weekend. And so, which is a lot of the playoffs are happening this weekend. We have USLW continuing this weekend. We'll get into that as well. But hey, the only place you can find these games will be on our platform this weekend, which is always really exciting, right? Because of our relationship with the WPSL. Obviously, some teams will have their own platforms that they have things go to, but consistently, if you want to watch these games, they'll all be available here on our platform here this weekend. So let's get into the bracket, though, as we talk about these games. And here they are. So we'll start off in Oklahoma City in the Central region. You've got St. Croix Legacy taking on Union KC. That game kicks off at 5:30 on Saturday. You've got Oklahoma City taking on Austin Rise at 8 p.m. Again, those are actually Central Standard Time. So 6:30 and 9 p.m. Eastern would be when those games kick off. Oklahoma City, a very, very good team. As well as St. Croix Legacy. So those obviously Union KC and Austin Rise could also have a good showing in this, but my pick right now would be St. Croix and Oklahoma City in the semifinal, in that final on the Central side.
Yeah, Chattanooga FC might be a sleeper too. I've been following up on, I know we had it on the prep sheet here, so I was looking at some of the different teams and what they might present to this tournament. But I was looking at Chat FC, and they're a really strong team defensively. Maddie Smith, their goaltender, has been really solid, at least in getting this team to this point. And they were kind of sputtering a little bit towards the end, but they found new life and they got hot at the right moments. And again, we mentioned how when you talk about postseason play, oftentimes, what you did during the regular season, yeah, that matters. But what matters more is getting hot when the moment really stands tall. In postseason play, when you get into elimination play, which this is right here, getting hot at the right time is equally as important as everything else that we just mentioned. So for that team, I think they're really good. They're really strong defensively. So I think they might be good for that first round win. Obviously, things get harder as they go, but I think they might be, if we're looking at, who a dark horse might be in this tournament. I think Chat FC certainly has a case for that. I will say they love their soccer down there. I know, one of the broadcasters that does games there in Chattanooga, and I know obviously the men's side has very great turnout, but even on the women's side, they've produced a lot of good teams too. So they kind of snuck in the back door when it came to the WPSL playoffs, but they're really good, and they got a stingy defense, so they certainly pose a threat to whoever they face. So I think that might also be a really good matchup to look at in terms of the South Division playing out in Washington, D.C. But I think Chat FC has a pretty good chance of at least getting to that Final Four.
Yeah, I don't know if I dispute anything of what you just said there. I do want to move into well, let's stay here in the South for a moment. You got Chattanooga, Arlington Soccer Blue. They're taking place. I do have my money on Chattanooga. If I had money in this, I don't. But if I did, it'd be Chattanooga. McLean Soccer taking on LA Crew Rush. McLean's been very good, as well as LA Crew. I actually am going to give this one to LA Crew. And so I would see Chattanooga and LA Crew in that final in the South. Let's head up now to the West. You've got SoCal Unit FC versus Spokane SC Shadow, California Storm versus El Paso Surf. If I had money on this, which again I want to make sure I say I do not, Spokane SC Shadow and California Storm is who I'd put my money on. And then we'll head over to the Niagara Falls in New York side east. You got Niagara 1812 versus Sporting CT and Brooklyn City FC versus PA Classics. I would go with Sporting CT and Brooklyn City to win that as well and make their way into that final. Again, those winners would then go on and play each other in a semifinal, in a final in there, and then they would then ultimately make their way on July 20th to Oklahoma City. So that is the WPSL finals right there. Playoffs.
Yeah, and a pretty stacked field too. So I know that obviously you and I were doing some USLW playoffs, but WPSL is about to be really fun. And you see it on the rundown there on the side of your screen. It's postseason time, so we're going to see the best of the best. As we see typically when it gets into this time of year. So yeah, a lot of great matchups there. I don't have money on it. I don't think anybody here has money on it, nor do I think you even can bet on it. But this is
you can. To be fair,
really,
WPSL has a significant amount of betting happening.
Wow,
significant.
I didn't know this.
We like games on Monday night. Like we had 2,000 people watching a game on Monday night last week, and they were betting. One person supposedly was betting $50,000 on that game.
Oh my goodness!
I know. So, but again, that's why I keep saying I have not bet on this, but But yeah. So I thought
us
that was
as media talent try to stay away from that as much as possible.
It's true. So before we dive into, let's dive in League for Clubs. We'll do that real quick. Okay. The League for Clubs does not have a bracket out. They're currently in their playoffs right now. The top two teams coming out of the Central region in the Mid-American Conference, Austin United FC, FC Revolution. Okay. Top two teams will play in their conference final, and then they will then head potentially to the finals later on in Texas here later this month. In the East region, Northeast Conference, you've got Kingston Stockade and First State FC. In the South Division, you've got FC Monmouth and the Lighthouse Boys Club of Kensington. Now, both those teams, I think the last time we saw Lighthouse, they actually got smoked. It was pretty like by a large amount. So interesting to see how that game will play out. In the South region, Gulf Coast Conference, you got Pensacola FC versus Pensacola FC Academy. So that's interesting. You're playing against yourself. It's always fun when you get that to happen.
Hey man, that's an intense rivalry right there.
AFC Mobile versus Union 10 FC in the West Division. And then in the NorCal, I believe Napa Valley is the one that came out on top, and that one will make their way into the finals. It just unfortunately just don't have a ton of information. But I just again in our research this morning, and we talk about this. This is the first year for this league, and I think they're trying to find that balance in all of it, right? The WPSL has been around for a long time. USL2, USLW, these leagues have been around for a bit. So they have a process in place. And I think that, again, trying to figure out how they want this all to work out it's a learning curve. And so you expect in years to come that League for Clubs will continue to elevate and to be, to maybe be in kind of same conversations of being like, hey, having a bracket like we're seeing here in the USL.
And they're still trying to build too. I mean, that's the other thing.
Yeah.
Like they keep adding new teams, they keep expanding. So they're kind of in that building stage right now. So they're going to get better because they kind of broke away from. There's so many different leagues, so many different formats, especially in the NorCal conference. They broke away from who they were affiliated with before, and now they're with this new league. And even Napa Valley, I mean, they're one of those new teams. They're one of those expansion teams, but they've always kind of had a foothold in that section of California. Like they've always had a lot of success in that area. Now they're shifting over to the League for Clubs. So there's a lot of organizational things they kind of have to hammer down in order to create that system that's able to get all that information out and obviously promote the league more. But with being a new league, I mean, we know it with still being a new business in one way or the other. I mean, I know you've been doing this for a long time, but there's a lot of things that have to go right in order to get yourself to that next level. So they're still building, but I will say, at least from the Napa Valley perspective, because I do believe I got to do at least one of their games this year, maybe a couple of games. I don't remember, but that's a team that whenever you come into a new setting after building a championship reputation in the area, you already have kind of that foundation of really good players that are coming in and playing for you. And again, that's the thing about winning games at a high level. Like it has this momentum thing, like it builds off of itself. And so that's exactly what that team was. They had already had this level of success. They brought in a lot of those players into this new league, this new format, and now they're going out and they're winning games. So it's no shock to me that they're in the postseason. I think they could be a team that could potentially make a push. But yeah, new league in the League for Clubs, figuring things out, but excited to see who pushes their way through.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say like it's not a negative. I mean,
no,
there's a lot of when you're talking about going from nothing to 45 plus teams and trying to maneuver and manage that has been, I'd imagine on some level would be the biggest challenge. And so again, we will continue to highlight the League for Clubs. Obviously, all their games come through us as far as like the overall broadcasts. And so we'll continue obviously to showcase that league. And I'd love to be able to get on this show. We have to start doing that. And it's something that me and you have talked about quite a bit, getting people regularly to come on the show and talk about the league and talk about things, to give them that platform to do that. Or we already have the platform to give them the opportunity to talk. And so we'll continue to look at ways to do that. But before we dive into USLW, I do want to add in USL2 for a moment, because right now here in Michigan, the Great Lakes Division, Midwest United already punched their ticket into the playoffs. And right now they're currently sitting first in the standings. And we saw this last year. Same thing happened with Midwest United last year. They were sitting first. They front load a lot of games early on because they have a lot of youth players that go back. And so they are currently sitting in first in the Great Lakes Division. All right. And if we look at this Great Lakes Division in totality, they have 25 points. Flint City Bucks have 21. Midwest United has finished and completed their entire season. They do not have any more games to play except for the playoffs, which they punched their ticket. AFC Ann Arbor is sitting currently second and tied for second with Flint City. AFC Ann Arbor has completed all of their games. Okay. Flint City Bucks still have 2 games remaining. And they have those 2 games remaining against the 5th place team in Northern Indiana FC and the last place team in Lansing City, who has yet to win a game this season. All Flint needs in order to make the playoffs is a tie tonight or a win. And then they secured the second place, right? If they win both games tonight and Saturday, they would claim the Great Lakes Division. So very interesting. We'll keep an eye on that. We'll talk about that. I'm sure, again, depending on how it happens here tonight in Northern Indiana. Well, because again, if you lose tonight, you have no hope of winning the league, right? 21 points. Now, if you tie, you'd have 22 points. So you'd secure yourself a spot And then with one game left, you could potentially tie at 25 points with Midwest United, at which point both teams, well, Midwest United at that point would then win it based on head-to-head because they won both games. Yep. And so very interesting to see how this will shape up. I'm curious. But either way, that is the USL League 2, and their playoffs start here next week. And where can you watch those? On Sports Engine Play. And who's producing those games? We are. So, all right. So with that being said, USLW playoffs. We took a look at the bracket here earlier this week. We'll take a look at it again here. Utah United will be traveling to Minnesota, this weekend. They will be playing at, was it TCO? Yep, TCO Stadium in Eagan, Minnesota. Game kicks off at 8 p.m. Eastern on Sports Engine Play, and we will continue. Again, we will be involved in that broadcast. And then NC Courage traveling to Asheville City, South Carolina. Asheville City, SC. And that game, will kick off at 7 p.m. Eastern here on Sports Engine Play. And so both those games kick off. Very interesting. Again, Minnesota Aurora beating Kings Hammer FC in the finals. They did so off of an 88th minute goal from Sage Wimes. And then Asheville City advanced to their first national semifinal following a comeback win after an extra time against Lone Star. The Texas team got on the board first in the 19th minute. They had a long strike from Tegan Whale. The home side kept their playoff hopes alive after Emma Sheehan equalized in second half stoppage time. And then Norora Dominic later headed in the go-ahead goal in the final moments of extra time to give them the win and moving on into a national semifinal. So those games kicking off this weekend. Again, on Saturday, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock Eastern. Watch those games on Sports Engine Play. And we should have the USLW Goal Zone again happening that same night. It was very successful this weekend, so we're looking forward to doing that again.
And it's really anybody's game in that Final Four. I mean, you and I mentioned it yesterday. Like there are so many components of all four of those teams that you can really like, and so it's kind of a toss-up, and that's a really great thing to have in that Final Four. You know, I know we talked about maybe who our favorites are, what the edge might be for certain teams, but you have someone with an opportunity to go back to back. You have teams with their opportunity to get their first. All of them they were high up there on the power rankings going into the playoffs, but Utah, Minnesota has looked just unstoppable with the way that they've been playing as well. So it's really a toss-up when you get down to this Final Four, even with what we said on the show yesterday, or I keep saying yesterday, 2 days ago, but it really sets up what could be a thrilling finish to all that. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see for sure.
We're going to spend the most remaining time of this talking U.S. Open Cup and mailbag. And I think important to spend some time to doing that. So I'm glad we got through all that just stuff that matters, but this is going to be stuff that I think it's going to be more impactful. U.S. Open Cup, once again, getting underway here this week. Quarterfinal matchups. Right. And so we talk about this U.S. Open Cup. I think the last game we saw was in June, June, or if not June, it was May. I don't remember the exact dates. The Open Cup took place back in May, or we had the round of 16. And we were talking about, talking about how the MLS teams had just made their way into this at this point, and they're now showing up, and now they're the ones competing. Let's talk about what happened here last night. Minnesota United FC claiming a 3-1 win over Chicago Fire. That game was at Alliance Field in St. Paul, Minnesota. Chicago Fire scored on a penalty. 28-minute penalty. Minnesota United, Robin scored a goal. Robin Ladd, Calvin Yaboa, and he scored a goal in the 95th and the 120th minute. Again, they give them a 3-1 victory here yesterday over Chicago Fire. San Jose Earthquakes, that game went into penalties, right? San Jose Earthquakes, it was 2-2. Austin FC coming away with the victory in penalties 4-2. And so those two teams will go on. Minnesota United will actually face Austin FC on September the 16th in St. Paul, Minnesota, and DC United or Nashville City or Nashville SC will face Philadelphia Union or the New York Red Bulls. All right, those two games have yet to be played. They'll be played here tonight. And so, again, same thing, September the 16th or 17th in at either one of those locations. So we'll see a couple more games here tonight to see who goes on.
Yeah, and of all those matchups, I thought it was funny in that Chicago Fire game. Minnesota United was actually playing up a man for the majority of that game. There was an early red card, and yet they needed extra time in order to get the job done. The 120th minute off a penalty to get that one through. So in a lot of ways, Chicago Fire kind of battled their way down a man into a position where they could potentially pull it off, just didn't have the legs to get it done. So obviously Minnesota United coming through at the end there. I thought that was a really interesting matchup. But yeah, to be honest with you, JT, I forgot that the U.S. Open Cup was going on there for a second. There was such a long break in between when they were playing to where obviously now they're finishing the tournament. And obviously you filter in the FIFA Club World Cup and all the conversations we've been having about the Gold Cup and what's going on with that tournament. I think that was a really interesting matchup. In terms of the other ones, the San Jose Earthquakes and Austin FC. That one was a barn burner as well. But for Austin FC, talk about first times doing things. The first ever U.S. Open Cup semifinal in this one. I think it maybe takes away a little bit from it, the fact that they are MLS squads, like we talked about earlier with the whole thing of the MLS kind of being half in, half out, and then these teams just filtering in later. Austin FC is one of those teams, but if there's anything you want to take away from it in terms of, again, storylines in watching this, I mean, it's their first ever U.S. Open Cup semifinal. So for that team, it means a little bit more, the fact that they're able to get to that. But their goalkeeper, Brad Stuver, has been really, really good. 2 of the 3 penalties, first 2 of the 3 that he saw, he was able to save in that game. And, we mentioned this, looking back at, the USMNT and them taking on Costa Rica and penalties. I realize it's part luck for the goalie, but I do think there is a skill involved to it, at least from what I've been hearing from people who have played that position and people in the soccer/football media. It takes a lot of work to be able to, anticipate and get inside the head of the person that's trying to score and doing the right things to make those saves, to put yourself in a good position to win it. And he was there. And so the importance of having a good goaltender in postseason play is everything. I mean, that's the centerpiece. I think in a lot of ways, it's kind of like your quarterback. He directs traffic. He's good at calling a game. He's good at, obviously in PKs, he was solid. So Austin FC might be a problem in that one as well. But yeah, we'll see what it comes down to. I know Philadelphia Union or New York Red Bulls. Philadelphia Union has a really strong following. We know that because we talked about them plenty of times on this show. So they have a really good supporter group. But yeah, a lot of fun, exciting matchups. But I think Austin FC is certainly one of those favorites, at least in my book, being that it's their first time in the semifinal. They got really good goalkeeping, so that'll probably carry them a good distance. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we've talked about this before on the show, and excluding the play right now, excluding the teams,
right?
It still makes zero sense that we don't know these games are happening.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand we're in the middle of like Gold Cup just finishing up here this past weekend. I know that the FIFA Club World Cup wrapping up, right? I know. But yesterday it was just announced that US Soccer is partnering with the soccer tournament, TST. Why are there crickets with the U.S. Open Cup? This tells me that U.S. Soccer doesn't give a shit.
They're not invested.
Well, why aren't they invested?
Yeah.
Why aren't we invested in this? It doesn't. Again, we can talk all day long about the lack of attendance and whatever else. There is nothing going on right now. in the world of sports? Nothing. The only thing happening right now is baseball and soccer.
Yeah.
What else is happening?
Right.
Like nothing. Why are we not promoting the shit out of this? Why is this not a thing? It doesn't make any sense. So again, what makes sense to me is that collectively in the soccer world, nobody gives a shit.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I mean, the Gold Cup, we give a shit. And my guess is that because it's also an amateur-based tournament, right? That maybe that is a reason as to why it's like, well, there's a chance a team that who we don't know about could make it someplace, and nobody wants that. Which I would argue that I think we all want that. I think that we would all love to see that.
Mm-hmm.
It would be great for soccer in this country to see a no-name team from wherever, whoever, makes their way into a final, makes their way deep into a tournament run. That'd be fantastic. Now, is it plausible? No. Possible? Yes.
Right.
And so I struggle with this as a fan of the soccer. And, we're going to get in the mailbag in a moment. And obviously we have a lot of comments. And so I do want to get into those because, but I'm curious. The question of the day, I'm going to ask that right now. And I want to ask you, the viewer at home, and anyone who's watching, whatever. Why don't we care about the U.S. Open Cup? Like, why? I want to know why. Why? Why don't we care? And maybe that's too broad of a question. Maybe the question should be, should we care about the U.S. Open Cup? So the question of the day isn't why. The question is, should. Should we give a shit about the U.S. Open Cup? I think I always say the first step of recovery, the first step to solving something is first off acknowledging that you have a problem. I think we need to ask that question. Should we care about the U.S. Open Cup? If the answer to that question is yes, and it's an overwhelming yes, then we as a collective need to figure out how to make it more meaningful. If the answer is no, then let's part ways with it and move on to something else. That's my thought process at this point in time. Because why are we doing it? Are we just doing it because it's there? It's like history? Okay. I mean, I as much as I like history, I mean, I do.
Right. But you can't expect people to just hear history and then show up and be invested in it. Like, just because something is old doesn't mean that automatically, because it has the novelty component to it, that people are going to clamor to it. And it's interesting because you saw when this cup started, the amount of media presence, the amount of media push. I mean, they were talking about it on ESPN. They were talking about it all these other places. The U.S. Open Cup is back. What do we have? I see Alexi Lalas obviously making cameos on Cowherd and talking on that show and all these other platforms about, what is, talk to me about this tournament. What do we have? Who are the teams? And all that other stuff. When it started, that's what it was, because there's this initial hype around it. There's this initial excitement. And so you see it in the media, and it's something that obviously people were excited about. But now, all these weeks later, especially when you talk about the gap in between what was happening and now all of a sudden, the tournament's there, all of a sudden now we have a big break and now we're back to playing. And again, it's mainly just MLS sides, but it's in the media, the middle of the FIFA Club World Cup, the Gold Cup, everything else that's going on. It kind of gets buried in the mix. And if you want, I think the question should be, does it matter to U.S. soccer? Because to the fans,
that's a whole nother thing, though. I that's a whole nother question all in itself,
right?
And I
think the answer is no, not really. I mean, if it did,
but again, I would argue that because we collectively don't care about the U.S. Open Cup, that's why administrations and governing bodies don't care about the U.S. Open Cup.
Yeah.
Right? Because again, if you're an MLS team and every time you host a game and you're selling out, regardless of what the game is, we're not talking about this right now. Okay? Money is what drives decision-making. If you're not seeing the dollars and cents of this, you're not gonna do it. You're not gonna give as okay. It's like, well, it's required you do this. Well, yeah, it's required, so obviously we're gonna do it. But we're not gonna pull all the stops. We even heard again, Clark, Tim Clark, I believe, right from Chicago and the Fire, and he's like, yeah, they don't bring out all the bells and whistles for these games. They only bring out they just show up. So it's like, yes, I think does U.S. Soccer care? Clearly, they don't care to the extent that they should. But if the money was there, if the people were there, if the crowds were there, they would care. And so that's what I think it is. I think it's a driving factor of lack of is why we're not seeing the caring. I mean, even Peter's like, hey, we should care about the U.S. Open Cup. But it's another MLS kind of cup since the MLS teams dominate mostly and under advertised. Well, they only dominate in the later stages. And this cup takes place 400 games that take place prior to an MLS team even getting into it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bunch of games that take place that have nothing to do with MLS teams.
Which, wouldn't you agree, the hype around the cup is at its height in the first couple of rounds? That's when you're going to see.
Because you have Chicago House is taking on whatever, and then oh my God, they won. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely, right. Absolutely. But again, it's what about that to the MLS sides? Would they even if I'm an MLS owner, I would want those games in my stadium. So why not have the host cities, these host MLS teams, have every single one of these games played in their stadiums? Now you say, well, you're not going to sell them out. No, but what an awesome opportunity for a team who makes it to the U.S. Open Cup. Why not offer them up, these stadiums? Don't make them pay for them. Say, here you go. Talk about how that would look for the U.S. Open Cup. Every single game played in a stadium. That would be amazing. And granted, it might not be. So maybe you're picking U.S. Open, MLS teams, maybe USL Championship team stadiums, right? Things like that maybe. But that's what I would do. Yeah, there's a cost associated with that, but I think that would be a great way to be able to help make this thing even better. But it's a whole other conversation for another day. But the question of the day is this: should we care about the U.S. Open Cup? Should we care? That's the question of the day. I'm going to push it on Twitter right now, or X, whatever you want to call it. Right? Should we actually care about this tournament? It's a question of the day. I think it's a good question. We'll talk about the results here, obviously tomorrow, based on who responds and all that kind of stuff. But that is the question of the day. Nathan Wangler, mailbag, mailbag, and I do want to, before we dive into this mailbag thing, I do want to say this because I think it's great.
Yeah,
I love the fact that people don't read or watch the entirety of the video.
Yeah.
I think it is one of the main reasons why we are where we are in a society today is we do not have the ability to watch an entire video and still have the audacity to comment. Like the definition of ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
Is like the comments in a TikTok video. Right? You can call it arrogance. You can call it ignorance. I mean, because some of it comes from a place of not knowing. Others come from a place of knowing, but choose not to do it. Right. But that's legit what that was this week on Monday. You have these comments coming in. And it's like, wow. And again, I don't expect them to know the entire history of us and our resumes before they make a comment about what we're saying. but 5 seconds. Most of these people watched the first 5 seconds of that video and did not watch anything else. And that's been a very important thing for us to say is we have to dive into this because these comments, for the most part, you can tell. But we're still going to talk about them. So let's go.
All right. Now, the first one I want to work in here, and we can we can go through some of the other fun ones. Maybe they got reviewed or taken out of the comment section by TikTok. I think it's great that they have a built-in mechanism that actually takes out some comments. It's a beautiful thing. So we don't have to do it ourselves. But Lou Jack Leo goes, quote, "Tell me you've never played soccer without telling me you've never played soccer," unquote. Now, I think someone responded to this. I don't believe it was me. But what I will say is that I love when people say that. They call other people casuals because something happened that favored their team. So they're like, "Oh, you're just a casual. You don't know the rules." Arguing about referees is just it's a tale as old as time when it comes to sports. But yes, you have never played, JT. You've never coached. You've never refed. You've never anything. Actually, you just got up one day and decided that you wanted to create this network just because. You're just faking it until you make it. So that's what Lou Jack Leo thinks.
I think that's a byproduct of just so many people having the ability to podcast too.
That it is. Yeah.
I mean,
you're right. You're 100% right.
If you're going through TikTok right now,
yeah,
they're a dime a dozen.
Yep.
Anybody can make a podcast now. And so I do think that unfortunately is, not a symptom, but it's a part of it's part of the problem is that everybody if you want to have a podcast, there's nothing stopping you. And while that's great, how do you know Jonathan Turner, Nathan Wangler's background when they're talking about these games or these moments? So it's a byproduct of everybody having, the ability to have their own show, their own podcast. And that's it. Obviously, if you watch this show on the regular, you know anything about me. You know I have an extensive background in soccer, not only as a player, as a coach, as a referee, as a commentator. I've been around it all. And so my opinions, while they might not be the same as yours, come from a wealth of knowledge in the game of soccer. So I would argue against it. But again, it is a byproduct of the fact that I can walk into any Target in the country, any Micro Center, any Meijer nowadays, GameStop. I mean, all of them sell microphones. You can get started on a podcast as simple as having AirPods and a webcam built into your Mac and stream, right? So anyone can do it. And that in itself has created the problem. This is one of the biggest challenges that we have too with Dan Stickrad, who talks about the news. He's like, there are so many people out there who are claiming to be in the media. They have not taken a course in their entire life about journalism. This man went to school 120 years ago, and learned how to write, using a calligraphy pen, dotting it in ink and writing it on scrolls. That's how Dan started to learn how to write stories. And he's just figuring out how to use technology to this day. He still gets, he smacks his computer screen. I mean, but then there's a kid who's 16 years old who created his own blog and has way more views than Dan will ever get because we live in this world where you can be in the media like that by simply just starting your own page. So I think it's a byproduct of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, the other thing, so CMYK says it's funny how these people have an opinion when they don't even know the rules. So the funniest part about that comment is that immediately afterwards, you explained what the rule was. You explained what the letter of the law was. And so when comments like that are made, it's like, yo, we did this. We did that. We told you exactly what was going on. Another one of the comments from CSC says, what would you prefer that he does? Just fall flat on his face? Just avoid hitting the ground? Now, I will say, and we appreciate all your comments. What I will say is that in the moment, because it does happen so fast, and I saw the side angle of it, if he doesn't put his hand down right, that it's happened so fast that he clearly did not intend to touch the ball. But that's exactly why we were having that conversation. And a lot of people are saying, even in the comment section here, that the rules surrounding and the enforcement of handballs has become less and less as time has gone along. It's become more and more relaxed. So, thank you for your comments on that. But a lot of people are just saying he didn't even mean to touch it. And so maybe that's what played into exactly what happened there.
Yeah. Okay. So first and foremost, did we want him to face plant? I don't know why that has anything to do with anything. Do I want a player to get a foot to the face? No, but it happens, right? Do goalkeepers coming out head first and get hit in the head with a knee? Yeah. I don't want that to happen, but it does. I mean, we don't want to see anyone get hurt. But to be fair, we're talking about somebody falling from 2 feet and hitting the grass. And so you're asking me if I want them to face plant from a 2 foot like distance onto the grass, I'm going to say I'd rather have that than this. Okay, so let's put that in perspective. It's not like he's falling off of a cliff and falling 100 feet down, and he was using the ball to stop himself from falling off of a cliff. He was keeping himself upright from falling from a 2 foot to 3 foot distance onto grass. Okay, so let's put that in perspective. Okay, he wasn't going to get seriously hurt. Okay, he wasn't going to die from this moment, and so to use that as any type of an excuse as to why this somehow should be applied the way that it was, to be fair, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Again, when we talk about this rule and this law specifically, we're talking about the handball, specifically the handball. And Tony Meola said it best. He's like, there's never been a time in my career where that wasn't a handball. Never. And the law was not written that way. The law was not written the way we saw it applied on Sunday. It was written so that when your hand was on the ground already, that the ball hit it. That's the way the law was intended to be used.
Mm-hmm.
Not as you're trying to come down, you find yourself on top of said ball. That's not how this law was applied. That's not how it was intended. Now, granted, the way that it's written leaves you no choice but to apply it the way that it was applied. But that's not what it's intended for. Right? It wasn't, because you're going to slide and you're trying to, support yourself. Your hand's going to be on the ground, and the other one, and don't want to be waving it in the air like we talked about. That was the way this was intended for. So again, as I said the other day, this is the most obvious handball that I have ever seen. Hand to ball.
Yeah.
Literally had his hand on top of the ball as it was on the turf. I mean, like, legitimately. And so, no, this was not what it was intended for. But again, the way in which the laws have been written, it leaves you no choice but to do this. And I'll give you a perfect example of what the laws, why they've changed the laws, okay? Denial of an obvious goal scoring opportunity. Okay, of a player, we're inside the 18 and running into the box, and you pull that player down from behind, and you are the last defender, and they have a clear opportunity to score a goal. In the past, I would have no choice but to pull up my red card, eject the player for denial of an obvious goal scoring opportunity, and then give a penalty kick and award a penalty kick to the team that was the foul was on, right? That foul at the 50-yard line or half field, midfield, is a yellow card. It, in some cases, might not be any card, depending upon whatever it is, right? We determined that inside the 18, that this foul was more egregious and deserved more because you're taking something away. And what did IFAB do? They said, you know what? We think that rule, that law, is too much. So we're going to make an adjustment. As long as you're playing the ball inside the 18, you're making an attempt, and you happen to foul a player, it's now a yellow card and a PK.
Mm-hmm.
If it happens outside the 18 and all the dogs requirements are there, then it's a red card. we're double penalizing a team. You're giving them you're giving them a red card, you're ejecting them, and you're giving them a goal, basically, right? We're saying, well, that's too much. We're trying to do that. So there are certain laws and rules that absolutely should be changed. And do I think that the handball laws are written in a way in which it makes sense? No, obviously not. Obviously not. But we talk about this all the time. The biggest issue with handball, just like with offside position, is understanding when you see it, if it in fact is offside, is a handball. That's the problem. We don't know what it looks like. So we keep changing it so we have a better understanding of what it means, what it is. Offside. How many times has offside changed? To be behind the second to last defender in itself is not a penalty. It's not a foul. It's not anything wrong. It's when the ball is played, and after the ball has been played, where you are and what is taking place between your team and the defending team is now all the difference. And that's why it's gotten even more murkier. Well, now a referee has to determine whether or not a defender intentionally made an act to defend the ball. And if they did, that negates offside, right?
Right.
There's so many things that come, these variables, that now we have to determine in real time. And now we have VAR. Handball is the same thing. Well, okay, your unnatural position. So we agree that my hand above my head is unnatural. But to my side, if I'm trying to get my balance, wouldn't it be normal for me to have my hands out? Not unnatural to try to keep my balance if I had one foot on the ground?
Mm-hmm.
Right? But I go to slide. We argue that my left arm, which is the sliding arm closest to where my body is going to the ground, would be my support arm. And then over here become an unnatural, my upper arm, my right arm. So it's like we're trying to define all these things. And it's like, how about if the ball just hits your hand? There's two things you have to determine. Was there intent to play it with the hand or not?
Right.
And if you look at that and say, okay, well, John, did he intend to touch that ball? No, he didn't. So then based on what I just said, that would not be a handball. Right?
Yeah.
But we've made it so murky. That's why somebody even said, you're not making it murky. It's pretty clear. Yeah, explain the handball to me. Explain handball to me. I would love to have one person explain a handball to me. And then I would like them to explain to me, in the history of time, if there's ever been a more clear, obvious handball ever.
Yeah.
This actually looks more like a yoga move, to be fair.
Just getting a good stretch in.
It's like, but give me an example of when you've seen a more obvious handball.
Right.
That should be a question of the day too, by the way. But
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I'm reading through a couple of these and just trying to pick out what the best ones are. Because keep in mind, a lot of these are just like, you lost, cry harder, things like that. So you got to sort through all those other ones in order to find the ones that are actually worth talking about. Big Chung Guy said another point to bring up is that if this happened to a U.S. player, you would be defending this rule, but instead you complained because Mexico won. I think it's important to mention that in order to have this conversation, we had to acknowledge what the letter of the law is, and you did exactly that. But that doesn't appease people, right? And I think a lot of these comments are going after other comments, not necessarily us. Irv Jouar says, you Wonderbreads, calling us Wonderbreads. That's classy. Got to start looking at the rule book. The years go by, so does football, not soccer. It's called football. Okay, well, we can talk about that if you want. First of all, the term soccer was born in the UK. Okay, so those guys initially coined it. We picked up on that, and then they went back to calling it football. So, anyways, historically speaking, whatever. There's a story there. But the idea that somehow if this was done by an American player that we wouldn't be talking about it. Listen, guys, it's relevant. It was during a 1-1 tie. It was late in that game. right? So that in a lot of ways changed the entire complexion of that game, that one play. And so that's why we're having this conversation, regardless of whether or not either side that it's on, it's still worth talking about. And so would we have been as gung-ho about, it's probably one of the worst we've ever seen? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure in a lot of ways you may have simply still been that way simply because you've been a referee. You've been in those spots. But just thinking that just because, we're Americans, that all of a sudden that we're just going to pass over that and not talk about it is completely wrong, completely false. There's another comment in here. Disney Dad 2120 says Americans try to change things for their benefit. The world doesn't revolve around y'all. We're talking about ball here. We're not talking about anything else. And from what we saw, at least in that play alone, that to me is pretty damning. But last one I'll leave here. They're all kind of centered around the same thing. But DeVale Joe 87 says this wasn't a rule. They just implemented now. You act like they just implemented it specifically for this game. Get over it. The only people complaining are people that don't know soccer. It's been a rule, but to compare it to maybe something else that we see all the time, it's the same thing with rules changing, I feel like, in football. Like when it comes to certain things like pass interference, there's other sports and there's other examples of that. The rule's always been there, but the rules changed a little bit. So, that's, again, just claiming that you don't know anything about the sport simply because the rule has always been there. But you even said yourself that the rule in a lot of ways has changed. And so I think the hard thing here is, JT, is like when you talk about discretion, especially when plays are happening as fast as they are. And I know you have VAR and you have everything else like that. That's really hard because things happen so quickly. But at Santi says the rule has never been changed. You're the one making it murky with your rule explanation. Trash podcast, laughy face. So I guess the rules never changed in his mind.
That's the rule has changed. And again, we call them laws of the game. The laws of the game have changed. They've changed quite a bit over time, mainly because, again, players have gotten smarter. The game has gotten faster. And because of that, you have to make changes. And again, I made this comment the other day about how we get into a room and we want to make changes. I mean, want to define what a support arm is. I'm not going to guarantee you that this is going to see a change at IFAB, but they're going to use this to make a decision about what this looks like moving forward. This was not intended for that rule, that law. It wasn't intended. That was not the intention of it, period. And again, based on how the law, and I would argue too that I don't, if he calls this a penalty kick, I don't think they're going to overturn it. I don't think VAR is going to overturn it. I don't think so. And so I think it could have gone both ways. It's funny. I talked with one of my referee friends the other day about this, and he laughed. We joked around about it. I asked him. I point blank said, "Hey, what year did this law actually change?" And his response was right before the players took the field. that was his. that was his answer. Longtime referee who referees at some of the highest levels in this country. And so, and I say referees at the highest levels, Big Ten, and so, and take it for what it is. You'd find hard pressed to find a referee who maybe doesn't call it like that. But I appreciate you thinking our podcast is trash. That's cool. Appreciate that too.
Right.
Again, I don't have any skin in that game. Yes. Do I want the U.S. men's national team to win? Of course I do. Do I want to see a good soccer game? Yeah, absolutely I do. Do I want to see games come down to calls that referees do or do not make? No. That says a former referee in me. There are many games that I was, as a referee, that I was a part of where I had to make a decision. They called them courageous decisions, right? Having the courage to make a call is something that referees have to deal with on every single game. There's a moment in a game where you have to be courageous, either to call it or to not call it.
Yeah.
You could argue both sides for this referee, right? I mean, because now this call is going to be looked at and scrutinized for a very long time. And so do I think that he got this wrong? I said that before. No, I don't. I think based on the way the law has been written, it doesn't leave you a lot of room to really, it's right there. That's why I'm saying you're going to have to add something. If, like, for example, if a player who is coming down and their support arm happens to land on top of the ball and uses that ball, for whatever you want to call it, for leverage to stay up, whatever, you would argue that would probably be intent. Because now I look at this and say, how many players out there who know the laws of the game, just like we've seen in football, where you see a really good kickoff and a player is at like the goal line and they realize they're about to get tackled. So they have their hands on the ball and stick a foot off the field and it earns them a place at the 40-yard line, right? How many times have we seen that smart, intelligent play by kickoff returners in the NFL? You're telling me that players aren't learning how to slide in a way in which they can put their arm in a certain way that it's their support arm so that they can give themselves a chance to maybe stop a ball and it be quote unquote the support arm? You don't think that we're doing all that? I mean, I would argue that we are, because our players are smarter and stronger and faster today than they were 20 years ago.
All right.
So I would argue that this player knows the laws of the game, knows how it's maybe going to be interpreted. And well,
you see him immediately move his hand. Yeah, I mean, like, I think he knew what he did. Whether or not, again, the intention was there, he moved his hand because he knew in that moment. We'll leave it here. A lot of good ones. We can continue to circle back on this as well. I know we're up against it time-wise, but Hectorito says he didn't block or change the ball path. Damian responds to it, says your argument is that he never changed the path of the ball, but by putting his hand on the ball, he prevented the ball from moving. You don't have to have much soccer experience to know that argument is flawed, and it is flawed. And that's the other thing, right? When we talk about discretionary decisions, you do have to be bold when it comes down to it. Yeah, this old Palm. Yeah.
Again, I can't think of a time period. And if you're asking me, again, because you already asked me, would I call this based on the way the law is written? I would not. But I can't think of a time in my refereeing career that wouldn't have been a handball. I just can't. I mean, the ones that hit off and bounce off the ground, hit you in the hand, the ones that come in, and there's a lot of balls that just kind of bounce around and they end up hitting a hand. And you're like, oh, that's a PK. I can't think for 1 second how in any of if I ever saw that ball like that in that moment, a hand on that, there's no way I wouldn't have called that. There's no way. And so I that's why I said this. In the history of soccer, there is not another more defining handball that we've probably ever seen.
Yeah. Because
this one, legitimately, you can't hide it. There's no interpretation. You know what I mean? There's no other way to interpret it. Like, it's a handball. Like, again, I mean, there's no dispute of that.
Yeah.
It's a handball. Just like when you see a player who's in an offside position. That player is in an offside position. Now, they might not have gotten the ball, but they were in an offside position.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's lots of moments where we can say, but that definitively was a handball.
Yeah.
Now, because of the laws of the game, we're not going to penalize the team for that. That's a handball. That's handling. And so I think that's important for us to say that. Not looking for them to change the outcome. Can we do better? Yes, we could absolutely do better. And I think that, again, IFAB needs to look at this and say there needs to be something that's to be put in the laws of the game that you look at that and say that's not how this law was intended. We need to add something into the white paper, something to be able to make this,
Yeah.
Books. Be back at it again here tomorrow morning on Inside the Game. Great conversations. We'll talk Midwest Premier League tomorrow. We'll talk, again, question of the day. We'll talk about what your thoughts are on the U.S. Open Cup. Should it be something we care about? Should we care about this? I say yes, but I'm also not everybody. So clearly, I don't know my soccer either. So I think it's important that I state that I don't know anything, and that's okay, because I went to the store one day and bought some podcast gear and started this podcast.
Also, no European football, soccer for Christian Pulisic next year. I think that's interesting. That just came down the pipe. Won't be ramping up for the World Cup, so maybe he's locked in. Who knows?
Well, we'll talk more about that tomorrow as well. But you've been watching Inside the Game here on the National Soccer Network. Come back here tomorrow, same time, same place, right here between 9 and 10 a.m. on Inside the Game.